Game 3 for us in Boston outside TD Garden right now. Let's start with the injury report. Robert Williams listed as questionable, has that leg soreness in his knee. Played in games 1 and 2, James, but collided with Marcus Smart in game 2. What's the latest on his health and status going into tonight?
Yeah, he's questionable, but he's been questionable for virtually the entire postseason. I would personally expect him to play, but whether he plays or he doesn't, the thing to keep an eye on is how Boston handles its front court rotation. I think regardless of whether or not Robert Williams is available, there's an argument they should be going small more often instead of going with those two big lineups that have had some issues, even defensively. Like, Robert Williams has been incredible around the basket, but Golden State has been targeting him in pick and rolls and trying to get him to defend on the perimeter.
Got to get more from Al Horford and company in this game 3 tonight after a lackluster performance in game 2. Let's get to some picks and props. And Marcus Smart, his steals set at a steal and a half, 1.5, exactly his average over the last 4 games. Where are you going?
I would go over just because I expect a defensive response from Boston in this game, and also because with all the focus on the Celtics turnover issues, especially in the first half of game 2, we should keep in mind the Warriors are a turnover-prone team themselves, and against this elite defense, we haven't seen Golden State get that sloppy so far in this series, with the possible exception of the fourth quarter of game 1. I think we might see some of those issues crop up on the road here in Boston.
All right, over at plus money, plus 120 there. Let's move to Jason Tatum points. It's set at 27.5. And following a loss this postseason, he's been great, averaging 31.5.
I still went with the under on this one just because of the way the Warriors are defending him. They're really loading up on Tatum, on Brown as well. But I think you've sort of seen it in the series already. In the first game, Tatum didn't score a heck of a lot, but he was amazing as a facilitator. In game 2, the opposite was true. He scored a ton of points. He hardly got any potential assists, let alone assists. I think he's going to go into this game with the mindset of being a playmaker because that's what's best for the team in this specific matchup.
Okay, under, minus 105. There's a little bit more juice on the over. So let's move on to Steph Curry. 28.5 is his point total tonight. He's been over that in both games so far in this series.
Yeah, I would go under on this one just because while we haven't seen the Celtics handle the high pick and roll well with Stephen Curry in the first 2 games, again, I think their defensive intensity is going to ratchet up in this game. I think they might play more smaller lineups as opposed to the 2 big lineups that we've seen get a lot of run in the first 2 games of this series. It might turn Stephen Curry into more of a guy who attracts a lot of attention and gets off of the ball rather than a guy who is going to dominate with his scoring.
What kind of splash brother is he going to have tonight in Klay Thompson? His threes made total is 2.5, $1.70 the over on that.
Yeah, I would go over. It has looked rough for Klay Thompson to start this series, but he never stays in a slump for too long. And oftentimes when he erupts out of a slump, he does it in a really big way. He knows that his shot selection was not particularly good in the first 2 games. He kind of acknowledged that at his press conference yesterday. Steve Kerr did as well. He's been pressing. He's been forcing the issue. I think he just has to let the shots come to him within the flow of the offense, and he can find a rhythm that way. Once he makes a couple of easier looks, then some of those tougher contested ones with a hand in his face, those might start to actually go down.
He might be the X factor, the deciding factor in this series for the Warriors. Celtics are favored tonight, minus 3.5 here in game 3. Which side are you falling on the game line?
I'm on the Boston side. I picked them at the beginning of the series to win this series. I picked them in game 1, and they sort of showed in that game like a lot of the sort of reasons to believe in them. Their defense in terms of handling the Warriors off-ball stuff has been mostly pristine in this series. I think there's some adjustments they can do in terms of their pick and roll defense. In terms of just their rotation, I don't think you'll see Daniel Tice, for example, get much run in this game. Beyond that, just from a sort of macro perspective, I just don't think we've seen Boston play at its best so far. Not all of that is because of the Warriors. Yes, they stepped up their defense in the second game. But I think a lot of the turnovers we saw from Boston, a lot of the sort of bad decisions that they made, this was self-inflicted stuff. This was just the Celtics getting into some bad habits. And I think they'll clean a lot of that up in this game because they've responded after every loss that they've had in this playoff run.
And the Warriors have as well. Might be a back-and-forth series. It certainly has been so far. Warriors are slight favorites to come out on top in this series at minus 115. You said that you picked the Celtics from the start. You have them in game 3. How do you see the series playing out?
Yeah, I would still stick with that Celtics pick. I think we've seen reasons why it might be a long series, sort of similar to the Celtics Heat conference finals in the East, where teams sort of exchanged these big, huge runs, and they could look lackluster one quarter and then go nuts the next quarter. Or game to game, you saw sort of the same thing. Once one team gets on a roll defensively, oftentimes that translates to them getting out on the break, getting easy buckets, and then forcing the opponent to play against their set defense. So you see these cycles where the defense feeds into offense, and teams can change a game that way. That's why I sort of see this series going long, but none of the reasons why I picked the Celtics at the beginning of this series have been sort of disproven so far. I think they have a better balance when it comes to finding lineups that can close a game, guys that can switch every position, that can also space the floor. It is just sort of a simpler game for Boston, and I think they can just, if they make more simple plays in this game, then they can fix a lot of their offensive issues. And I have a good feeling about them fixing that in this game tonight.
Well, it is now a best of 5, and the Celtics have home court advantage beginning with Game 3 tonight. James Herbert covering it for us there at TD Garden. Thank you, James. We'll be checking back in with you throughout the afternoon and evening. The game tonight is a little after 9 Eastern. The rest of the tips are going to be at 9 Eastern, unless it goes 7, which many believe it will, including Sportsline. The simulations have the Warriors winning in 7 games. That tip for Game 7 would be a week from Sunday at 8 Eastern. By the way, only one off day between Games 3 and 4, 2 off days before every other game.